I saw you watching.
She kissed a stranger to save his life, and vanished before he could learn her name. Marceline knew that man would be murdered that night, so she did the only thing she could. She walked up to him, faked fear, asked him to be her boyfriend for a few minutes, and kissed him in front of the men who had come to kill him. Then she disappeared. But Dante Sabatini was no ordinary man. He was the boss of the Boston Mafia, and now he was willing to turn the city inside out to find the woman who saved him. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Kiss Nobody Asked For. The office window hadn't closed right since May. I knew because I'd tried 3 times that morning, and all 3 times the October wind crept back in under the loose glass, lifting the edge of the report I'd just printed. Boston liked to remind me where I was. The smell of rain coming down off the Atlantic. Orange leaves stuck to the asphalt down below. A cab honking at someone who wasn't going to move anyway. The kind of morning that looks just like every other one until it stops being. I set the paperweight on top of the report and went back to my reheated coffee. The name on the cover was the same as the last 11 months. Dante Sabatini, 38 years old. Address in Back Bay. Routine split between the restaurant conglomerate in the North End and the construction company in Beacon Hill. Allies, partners, schedules, patterns of arrival and departure. Everything a man like Harlan Pierce could want to know about Dante Sabatini, and probably a few things more that he hadn't asked for yet, but that I knew he'd want. The gray steel file cabinet in the corner, inherited from the room's former owner, held the copies. I always made a copy. I'd survived 10 years as a private investigator believing in 2 things. Nobody pays you for what you know. They pay you for what you can prove, and no client is exactly who they say they are. I sealed the manila envelope, wrote Pierce's name in the corner, and went down the 3 flights of stairs to the cafe on the ground floor. He was already at the table in the back, near the card reader. Coat too thin for the cold, collar turned up, fingers tapping the rim of his cup to a rhythm that wasn't any kind of music. "Marceline," he said, without standing. "Mr. Pierce." I set the envelope on the table, turned the chair around, sat down. He didn't touch the package. He looked at the door, then at his watch, then at me. This was the 3rd meeting like this. The first time I'd taken it for nerves. The second, for habit. This time I took it for something else. The specific texture of a man hoping you won't ask questions. You got what we asked for. I got what we agreed on. He finally pulled the envelope toward him, but didn't open it. He pushed a white sleeve toward me. The payment. In cash. As always. No signature. No receipt. None of the things that make a job legal. "You going to want more?" I asked. He hesitated a second longer than he needed to. "I'll let you know." He left before my coffee arrived. I watched the door spin shut behind him, the thin coat disappearing around the corner of the street, and the rest of the day already settled onto my shoulders with the familiar weight of something that didn't have a name yet. Anyone who doesn't want more information on Dante Sabatini is either at the end of the job or at the end of their own skin. Pierce didn't look like the type to wrap things up calmly. In the afternoon, I took a cab to Back Bay to close out a smaller case. Suspicious wife, furniture importer husband, the underground garage of a commercial building where the man parked a red sedan his wife didn't know about. Routine work, camera in my pocket, patience ready, collar up. I rode down in the service elevator, found my spot between 2 pillars on level B2, and waited. The concrete held the cold differently than the open air. It crept in through the shoulders, the ankles, the back of the neck. The smell was of motor oil and old damp. I leaned against the pillar, adjusted the camera's angle, and let the time pass the only way I know how, without hurry and without hope. That was where I heard it. 2 male voices, echoing off concrete, Boston accents deep in the throat, one of them dragging his words on purpose. They were 2 spots behind me, on the other side of a white van whose side door stood half open. The echo of the underground garage threw every syllable against the low ceiling and gave it all back clean, as if the 2 of them were talking inside a pipe. Neither of them had any idea there was a woman on the other side of the pillar trying to film some gentleman with imported furniture. "Tonight," said the deeper voice. "Where?" "The restaurant in Beacon Hill. The one near the square. The Italians having dinner there at 9. Alone. Alone. No security. Guaranteed." I rested my forehead against the pillar. My heart had started beating in a place that wasn't my chest. It was a little higher up, at the base of my throat. I knew the restaurant. I knew the time. I even knew why he'd be alone. I had written about it in an August report. Dante dined alone on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always at the back table, always without security. The one moment of the week when he let himself disappear from his own life. How many? The second one asked. 2 inside, plus 3 outside in case he makes a run for it. And if he shows up with company, he won't. The boss guaranteed it. The footsteps moved off. A car door slammed. A V8 engine turned over and died on the ramp. I stood there for a length of time I couldn't measure. The echo of those voices kept going in the concrete after they'd left, or maybe just inside me. I could leave. I could go up that ramp, catch another cab, head back to the office, lock the door, tape the window shut the way I always did, open a bottle of bad wine, and forget. It wasn't my job. It wasn't my city in the sense those men understood cities. Dante Sabatini was nobody to me, except he was. I knew him better than I should. 11 months of reports don't fit in a paragraph, but what mattered in that instant fit in a single sentence. If he died that night, a person no one else would know to look for would be left with no one. If Dante died, that person would be left with no one. I pushed off the pillar. The movement came on its own, before I'd finished the internal argument. Sometimes the body decides before the mind organizes itself, and that discovery, I'd learned over the years, tends to be more honest than any reasoning that comes afterward. I went up the ramp. I caught another cab. The address came out of my mouth before the decision had even crossed all the way through my thoughts. The restaurant sat on a narrow street in Beacon Hill, discreet facade, an iron lantern lit at the door, the orange glow spreading across the drizzle-wet sidewalk. I arrived 20 minutes before 9, paid the driver in cash, fixed my coat, and tried to remember how you walk into a place like that pretending you'd always walked into places like that. It didn't work. The maitre d' looked at my wet hair and broke into a smile that was almost a question. "I'm meeting someone," I said. "Name?" "He's already at the table." He let me through. I crossed the dining room without turning my head, but I saw everything. I saw the elderly couple at the first table, the woman slowly adjusting her necklace. I saw the man in the gray jacket at the bar pretending to read the menu a little too calmly. One page, open to the same spot since I'd walked in. I saw the second one, near the kitchen corridor, empty hands and too many eyes. And I saw, at the back, at the table against the brick wall, the profile I recognized from photographs taken 200 meters away. Dante was alone, half a glass of red, white shirt under a black jacket, no tie, cuffs clean. His left hand rested open on the cloth, and his right turned the glass by the stem in a slow circle. I knew that gesture. I'd written about it months ago, in one of the first reports. I kept walking. I had no plan. When I passed the man in the gray jacket, my heart climbed another centimeter up my neck. 4 steps. 3, 2. I reached the table. Dante looked up before I spoke. Dark green, patient eyes, the kind that don't startle. He opened his mouth to say something polite and firm at the same time, the kind that sends you away without needing to raise his voice. I didn't wait. I leaned in. I held his face with both hands. I pressed my mouth to his. The world went quiet for an absurd second. His skin smelled of something woodsy and expensive, and his jaw was rougher than it looked in the photos. And I felt, under my hand, the exact instant his body understood that this was neither a request nor a goodbye. It was a performance. He didn't pull away. He didn't kiss me back, but he didn't pull away. His right hand let go of the glass with the calm of someone defusing a bomb. I pressed my lips to his ear. "I need you to pretend to be my boyfriend for a few minutes." His breath came out slowly against my neck. I pulled back just far enough to be seen from the dining room. I gestured with my eyes, lightly, toward the man in the gray jacket at the bar. "That guy is following me. I'm scared." He looked at me. It took a second longer than I expected. His eyes traveled from my face down to the hand still trembling against my own arm, and came back. He didn't ask if I was sure. He asked something else. "How do you know he's following you?" "He's been at my hotel since yesterday." "Are you sure it's him?" "I'm sure." Dante pulled out the chair beside him with his foot. "Sit." I sat. He took my hand on the tablecloth with absurd naturalness, as if he'd done it 100 times, and with the other he drew his phone from the inner pocket of his jacket. He dialed a number from memory. "Tom," he said, low, "I need you at the restaurant. Now." A pause. "No, I'm fine. Bring the boys." He hung up. He didn't let go of my hand. "You have security?" I asked, whispering. "I went out alone today." "Why?" "Because sometimes I like to have dinner without anyone watching me." I smiled without meaning to. It was the first thing he'd said with any life in it, with something human inside. I thought, for half a second, that it was a shame to have met that man this way, in a dining room with 2 gunmen and a well-built lie between us. The next 12 minutes passed in a kind of thick time. He ordered wine for me. He made small talk low enough that it seemed intimate. He laughed at something I said and that I no longer remember. His eyes swept the dining room behind me with the precision of a man who wasn't just acting, he was confirming, slow, methodical, with no muscle of his face betraying what he was doing. I wondered, as I pretended to study the wine, how many times in his life that man had survived this way, through the perfect surface he maintained while calculating everything underneath. When the 3 cars pulled up at the door, everyone in the restaurant noticed. The man in the gray jacket dropped the menu on the bar and left before Tom Mercer came through the door. The second one, near the kitchen, vanished down the service corridor without a sound. Tom stopped 3 steps behind me, tall, hands folded in front of his body. Without saying a word, I let go of Dante's hand. "I'm going to the restroom," I said, smiling. "Want company?" "I want a minute." I stood. I walked to the corridor in the back. I went through the restroom door. I waited 3 counted seconds. I left through the other door, the one that led to the kitchen corridor. I passed the dishwasher with my head down, at the quick pace of someone nobody is going to want to stop and question. I crossed the pantry, between stacked wine crates, and the strong smell of rosemary. I pushed the fire door. The alarm didn't go off. Old restaurant in an old building. Inspection overdue. The kind of thing I calculated without thinking. The fine drizzle fell on my back like relief. I walked 3 blocks on foot before catching another cab. The asphalt gleamed under the streetlights, and every step that took me away from the restaurant was a step toward something I still didn't have the vocabulary to name. Relief, maybe, or the beginning of a problem I'd created with my own hands. I didn't look back. Inside the restaurant, I imagined the empty glass on the table, the restroom door he'd keep watching for 15, 30, 60 minutes before accepting that I wasn't coming back. And I wasn't coming back. Chapter 2, 5 minutes before the bullet. When I got into my apartment, I still had my coat over my head. I didn't turn on the light. I locked the door with both turns, leaned my forehead against the wood, and stayed there until my breathing went back to where breathing was supposed to stay. The apartment smelled the same as always, old coffee, and the faint mustiness of paper coming off the stack of files piled on the living room table. And for some reason, that familiar smell was what finally let my shoulders drop. It was maybe 3 minutes, maybe 7. Then I did everything I'd learned from a manual I'd written myself years before. I yanked the curtains shut in a single pull, the heavy fabric blocking the orange reflections of the streetlights outside. I took off the wet clothes, left the pants and the coat in a heap in the bathroom, didn't bother to hang anything. I took a cold shower because a hot one loosens the watchfulness too much. I'd learned that from a veteran investigator who smelled of cheap cigars and rarely got it wrong. I rinsed my mouth 3 times, with the determination of someone trying to wipe out evidence. I felt the taste of his wine still there, under the toothpaste, persistent and faintly bitter, and I stopped trying to get rid of it. I sat on the edge of the mattress with a towel wrapped around my shoulders and swore, to a witness that was only myself, that I'd never set foot within 10 blocks of that man again. That the kiss had been an accident of conscience, that Pierce would manage with what he had, and that I'd go back to infidelity cases in Back Bay and accounting fraud in the seaport, and that the name Sabatini would leave my vocabulary before the end of the week. The apartment was too quiet. That was the most treacherous part of working alone. The silence gave everything back unfiltered. The thin wind beat against the window that wouldn't close right, and I heard the intermittent click of the frame against the wood, a sound I used to ignore, and that now seemed irritatingly present. I believed myself for almost 4 hours. I learned afterward, from a source who owed me an old favor in the Back Bay building, pieces of what happened in the penthouse that night. Enough to imagine the rest. Dante hadn't taken off his jacket. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the Charles, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The rest I can only reconstruct as if it were a scene of mine, and maybe it is, now. The city below kept moving with its usual indifference. Cars, lights, the reflection of the river cutting through the dark, and he looked at all of it, as if he were waiting for the landscape to offer him some answer Tom still hadn't been able to give. Tom, he would tell me later, paced back and forth behind him twice, and the third time he stopped. Boss. Nothing. The cab drivers on the street didn't pick up anyone matching the description. They're pulling the restaurant cameras. I'll have something in the morning. Dante didn't answer. Tom knew that silence. It was the silence that came before the wrong decisions. That heavy silence that had preceded 3 or 4 resolutions over the past years that neither of them ever mentioned out loud. He decided not to push. The phone, from what Tom told me, rang at 3:12. He answered, listened for 40 seconds without saying a word, and his face changed in a way that changed Dante's face by reflex. He crossed over to his boss and said quietly, the kind of quiet you use at a wake. There was an ambush at the restaurant tonight. 2 of Halloran's men inside, 3 outside. It was set for 9:15. I just confirmed with our contact in Charlestown. Dante didn't move. He looked at the glass, then at his own reflection in the window pane, the dark jacket, the closed-off expression, the firm line of the jaw that rarely betrayed what was happening inside. His hand opened on the shelf, the fist unclenched slowly, as if he were counting his fingers. Say it again. Tom said it again. Dante closed his eyes. Tom would tell me, much later, that it was the first time in 5 years he'd seen his boss grip the edge of the shelf like a man who needs the ground under him. The woman from the kiss wasn't afraid. She was saving his life. He turned to Tom with a calm that wasn't calm. It was the kind of composure you train for years precisely for the moments when everything inside is collapsing. Find her. Sir, with all due respect, she's not going to want to be found. I didn't ask what she wants. I said find her. Tom nodded once. He left. The penthouse door closed with the discretion of expensive doors. Dante was left alone in the room with his own reflection in the window, and the Charles outside, impassive. It took him 3 minutes to lift the glass to his mouth. When he drank, it was in one swallow, and the whiskey went down as if it were going down through a crack that hadn't been there before that night. He didn't know her name. He knew her face. He knew her voice. He knew the taste of her mouth, brief and firm, with the urgency of someone controlling her own heart while she carried out a plan. He knew the way she tilted her head when she lied, and he was sure she'd lied about at least one thing at that table. He just couldn't decide which. It was little. It was enough. 3 weeks later, I was still in the life I'd sworn to take back up, pretending nothing had changed. It had changed. Joss showed up at the office on a Tuesday with 2 coffees and a question she dropped on the desk before she even sat down. Are you sleeping? I am. Liar. She pushed the cup toward me. Joss Whitaker had been my best friend since I was 23 and bartended in the South End as if the bar were a stage and the customers an ungrateful audience. She had the kind of humor nobody asks for and everybody needs, and a particular knack for showing up at the exact moment I was convinced I didn't need anyone. The coffee was good, strong, with too much sugar the way she always ordered it, because she figured everybody liked it that way and never asked first. You've got a face I've only seen once. She crossed her legs and studied my face with the attention of someone who'd spent years watching strange people from the other side of a bar, and it was when you got with that history professor in Cambridge and found out he was married. I'm not with anyone. I can see that. She took a sip. It's worse, then. I didn't answer. I looked out the window that wouldn't close right and thought, for the 100th time, about asking the doorman to fix it once and for all. The gap let in a thread of cold wind that climbed up the wall and died at the level of the chair's back. I thought, for the 100th time, about not asking, because fixing the window meant staying another year in that office, and I still hadn't decided whether I'd stay. Marcy. What happened? Nothing. She accepted it. Not because she believed me. Joss never believed the first denial, a trait of hers I both admired and found exhausting. She accepted it because she was a friend, and a real friend knows when to push and when to leave the door cracked open. She got up, came around the desk, kissed the top of my head with the naturalness of someone who's been doing it for a decade, and left saying she'd come back with wine on Friday. When the door closed, I sat looking at the coffee cup she'd left and trying to remember the last time I'd lied to Joss. I couldn't remember. That afternoon, going down for lunch, I spotted the first of them. Dark coat, collar up, sitting at a table in the ground floor cafe of my building reading a newspaper he wasn't reading, and who looked at me for a second longer than a disinterested stranger would. A second longer is time enough when you've spent years training to count seconds. The next day, another man at the same cafe, different face, different clothes, but with the same wrong posture of someone pretending not to pay attention to anything while paying attention to everything. On the third day, I changed my route. I left through the back of the building, caught the T at Park Street, switched lines at Downtown Crossing for no apparent reason, went into a drugstore and left through the other door, Even so, on the fourth day, at the bakery on my block, a man I'd never seen greeted the clerk by his first name like a regular. The clerk frowned for half a second before smiling back. I saw that half second. I took the bakery's punch card out of my pocket and stopped going there. I called Pierce. The line rang 9 times. It cut off. I called the alternate number he'd given me at the start of the contract, the one for emergencies. Message saying the box was disconnected. I got to the office later that night, when the street was empty and footsteps echoed off the wet pavement, opened the gray cabinet in the corner of the room, took out the entire Pierce file, and carried it home in the backpack I kept pressed against my body, not on my back. They weren't after me because of Pierce. They were after me for something else, and I knew exactly what that something else was. The following days passed with that low, constant tension that wears you down more than declared fear. Pierce didn't come back. His office in Cambridge had been shut without any formal notice, and his name vanished from the business registry as if someone had simply pulled the plug. I'd been a piece of something bigger. I'd suspected that much from the day he pushed the last white envelope toward me without looking me in the eye for more than 2 seconds straight. Now I was sure. It was a Thursday in October. Late afternoon. The kind of late afternoon when Boston turns gray and gold at the same time, and nobody can decide whether it's still day or whether night has begun. Fine drizzle, just like the night at the restaurant, as if the city liked to repeat certain set pieces to make sure nobody forgot what had happened last time. I locked the office door, went down the 3 flights of stairs listening to my own footsteps, pushed open the street door with my shoulder, and I stopped. Leaning against a black sedan double-parked, there was a man. Dark coat, well-cut, hands in his pockets, shoulders too broad for the white shirt showing through the open collar. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the sidewalk across the street, patient, with that stillness of a man who's waited on things far harder than a woman coming down a flight of stairs. The drizzle left small glints on the shoulders of his coat, and he didn't seem to mind it, or the cold, or the time he was spending standing there. I recognized him before I saw his face. I recognized him by the way his right hand turned a key between his fingers. Slow, mechanical, almost unconscious. I'd written about that gesture in a February report. It was one of 3 ticks I'd catalogued as indicators that he was thinking. My heart didn't race out of fear. It raced out of something else, and I decided not to name that something else in that moment. Dante looked up. There was no surprise in his eyes. There was something else, slower and deeper, the kind that accumulates over 6 weeks of searching, and that finally, on finding what it was after, lets itself breathe without asking permission. He pushed off the car with his shoulder and crossed the 3 steps that separated the street from my sidewalk with that stride I'd described as controlled, and that now, up close, I recognized as something else. He stopped in front of me too close and too slowly to be casual, and the drizzle fell between the 2 of us as if it had fallen before. At another address, on a night neither of us would be able to uninvent, his voice came out low. You forgot to tell me your name. Chapter 3, lie number 1. The rain started before I took the first step onto the sidewalk. Fine, cold, the kind that doesn't soak you, just clings to your skin and stays. I tried to swerve around him the way you swerve around a strange dog in the street, head down and step firm. But Dante Sabatini was not a man you swerve around. He pushed off the black sedan with the calm of someone who has all the time in the world in his pocket and no other commitment ahead. Didn't you hear me? His voice came low, almost polite. I asked your name, and I didn't answer. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, without stopping. That tends to work as a clue. He caught up to me in 2 strides. He didn't touch me. He just walked beside me, at the exact rhythm of mine, and that was worse than a hand on the arm. I felt the fabric of his coat brush my elbow every 3 steps. He smelled of rain and of something woodsy I'd already catalogued months before, in a file he'd never see. You have 2 options, he said, without turning his face. Get in the car and we talk somewhere warm, or keep walking and I keep walking beside you all the way to Cambridge. Cambridge is 40 minutes away. I've got good shoes. I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing. He noticed anyway. He always noticed. I stopped at the corner, the red light marking a truce I hadn't asked for. I looked up and faced the man whose routine I knew by heart. The height was the same as the reports. The thin scar near his temple, too. What I hadn't accounted for was the way he looked at me now, as if he were reading a book he'd waited months to open, a book he wasn't convinced he'd find in some second-hand shop. I'm not going to your penthouse, I said, and I don't get into any car that doesn't have a taxi plate. Agreed. He tilted his head. You pick the place. That disarmed me more than it should have. I gave the address of the bar where Joss worked, in the South End, because it was the only territory where I knew exactly where the exits were and how many steps separated the back table from the back door. He opened the passenger door of the sedan and waited, unhurried, without a smile. I got in. The car smelled of leather and of silence. The driver didn't look back once. Dante touched his fingers to the fogged window and drew, with the tip of his index finger, a short, straight line, for no apparent reason. I sat watching his hand, the knuckles, the shape of his wrists, the way he held nothing with a certain confidence. I looked away before he noticed. "You're shaking. It's the rain. You're not wet." "Then it's the cold." He didn't answer. He just took off his own coat and laid it over my lap, without asking, without ceremony, like someone closing one subject and moving on to the next item on the list. The weight of the fabric was absurd, warm, heavy, with the woodsy smell I already knew by heart. I didn't say thank you. He didn't wait for me to. The South End bar was crowded enough to seem safe and empty enough to seem hand-picked. The lights were low, amber, the kind that turns any conversation into something more intimate than it is. Joss saw me before she saw him. I saw the exact instant she recognized the face of the man beside me. The tray slid a centimeter. 3 glasses shifted against the edge, and she raised an eyebrow that said, "Girl, you've got a lot to explain to me before sunrise." We sat at a corner table, our backs to the wall. Dante pulled out my chair. Not out of gallantry, out of method. That man did everything as if each gesture were part of a larger plan, part of an architecture only he could see in full. Joss appeared with 2 glasses and a smile trained for problem customers. "The house has a decent red and an honest whiskey," she said, without looking directly at him. "I'll send both, and then you tell me if I got it right." "We'll take it," I answered, without taking my eyes off him. Joss left, not before glancing back at me over her shoulder with that bartender expression that said, "Yell if you need to." I thanked her with a half-wave she probably didn't accept as a sufficient answer. Dante held the glass by the stem without turning it. This time, he looked at the wine like someone looking at a thought he hasn't finished forming. The reports hadn't prepared even 5% of me for what it was to be inside that man's gravitational field at a small table, the lights low, with no excuse left to leave. "So," he said at last, turning the wine slowly, "how did you find mine out before I found out yours?" I'd already rehearsed it in the shower, in the cab, in the mirror of the office bathroom. I'd rehearsed it with Joss one night, on the phone, pretending it was just conversation, until the lie sounded as natural as a story that had really happened to me. My voice came out firm. I was in a building in Back Bay. Work. I needed to make a call, and I went down to a corner of the garage off to the side where the signal was better. That's where, leaning against a column, I overheard 2 men talking on the other side of a car. They mentioned a restaurant. They mentioned a time. They mentioned your last name. I didn't know your face. I looked you up. He watched me for a stretch of time that felt longer than it was. The bar breathed around our table, the clink of glasses, the murmur of distant voices, low music nobody was deliberately listening to. "You look me up. On 3 different sites." I held his gaze. "You're in the papers more than you think. Why didn't you call the police?" "Because the police would have gotten there afterward. And because, if you were who the papers say you are, maybe you deserved the bullet." I took a sip. "But I can't decide that for anyone." The sentence came out sharper than I'd intended. It worked. Dante lowered his eyes to the glass, and the corners of his mouth lifted in a flash that lasted less than a second. "Go on. Go on with what? Why you went into the restaurant? Why you kissed me? You could have called anonymously," warned the manager. "Left a note at the door. You chose to go in. That was the hard part. I'd worked on it for 2 days." I leaned forward, lowered my voice, let the wine occupy the pause I needed. "I'm a journalist. Freelance. I cover organized crime for independent magazines on the East Coast, some under a pseudonym. When I heard your name in that garage, I recognized it from a file of mine, from months back. I knew I was in front of a story, and that, if I called the police, it would arrive late, the way it always does. So I went myself." He held my sentence in the air longer than he should have. Then he shook his head once, slowly, as if he were filing it away in some inner drawer to open later, when he was alone and could check each detail at his leisure. A journalist. Freelance, for independent magazines on the East Coast. Some come out under a pseudonym, for safety. That's why nobody on the street would tell you my name. And the man who was following you. I don't know if he was really following me. I stared at the glass. In that moment, I thought he was. Now I think I was too scared to be sure of anything. It was the excuse that fit in my mouth. It was the most useful half-truth I had. Accepting a small lie made it easier to swallow the others. Dante took a deep breath. I saw his shoulders drop a millimeter. A minimal relaxation. Almost imperceptible. The kind of thing you only notice when you've spent months studying the way someone exists in space. I saw the man letting himself believe, and I felt, for the first time that night, a shiver that had nothing to do with fear of dying. It had to do with what I'd just done to his life. "You took too big a risk," he said, low. "I could have been someone other than who you thought. I know. I could have hurt you, taken you away, blamed you for the kiss. I know." I swallowed hard. I accepted the risk. Why? I didn't answer right away. The real truth lodged at the base of my throat. Heavy, not fitting into any acceptable sentence. I thought of the girl from the reports, barefoot, described by an informant months ago as a dark-haired child with a book always in her hand. I thought of the Pierce file. I thought of every night I'd watched, from across a wet street, Dante's figure get into a car and drive away without knowing he was being watched. Because someone needed to do something, I said, at last. And I was all that was left. He didn't answer. He just reached his hand across the table, slowly, and touched the tips of my fingers with the tips of his. A minimal touch. No pressure. A test that lasted less than 3 seconds and took up far more space inside my chest than it should have. I didn't pull my hand back. Neither did he. Joss appeared with a cheese board I hadn't ordered, and the smile of someone wanting to check that I was still breathing. I let out the air when she left. Dante kept his hand where it was for another second. Then he drew it back. With the same calm, he'd laid his coat over my lap, as if he'd finished what he needed to do, and felt no need to comment on it. We talked for hours. He asked me about work. I lied with the skill of someone who's been lying since she was 19. I talked about stories I never wrote, about magazines that existed, but that I'd never set foot in. I talked about the frauds I'd heard about, the disappearances I'd read in the late-night papers while waiting for sources who never showed. I fitted the lie onto the skeleton of the truth with a precision that scared me, because working that way is what makes me a good detective. It's also what's going to destroy me one day, and I know that with a clarity I'd rather not examine for too long. He spoke little. He listened. Every time I hesitated, he waited without filling the silence. Every time I lost my way in a word, he pulled the thread back with a short, precise question, the kind that seems casual and isn't. It was an interrogation disguised as a dinner, and I took part in it with my eyes open, because the alternative was to get up and leave, and no part of my body wanted to do that. When we left, the rain had stopped. The pavement was wet and dark, reflecting the orange light of the street lamps like an imperfect mirror. He took me home. I gave the address to the driver through the rear view, low, and the car slid through the streets as if it already knew the way. Maybe it did. Maybe he'd had it found out during the weeks I'd sworn I was being followed by the wrong man. I got out of the car. He got out too. We climbed the 3 steps of the building together, without conversation, under the weight of that silence that wasn't uncomfortable, and for that very reason worried me. He didn't try to come in. He didn't try for a kiss. He didn't try anything. He stopped on the last step, hands shoved in the pockets of the coat he'd forgotten to take back at the bar, and stood looking at me with the patience of a man who's already decided what he wants and is in no hurry to get it. "Marceline?" I turned. "Yes, it's a good name. You should have told me sooner." I went up to my floor with that name in his mouth hammering inside my chest. I closed the door. I leaned my back against the cold wood, felt its resistance against my spine, and slid to the floor slowly, with no strength left to do anything else. I realized I was smiling. I wiped the smile off my face at once, like someone tearing off a burn, because the smile meant something inside me had stopped calculating. And for the first time that night, for the first time since I'd taken Pierce's contract, I felt real fear, not of him, of what I was about to do. Chapter 4. The night he almost died again. Friday began with Tom Mercer opening the car door for me, and I swear he greeted me with that half nod of the head that very dangerous men reserve for people they haven't yet decided whether they like. The air was damp, with that smell of wet asphalt Boston gave off when autumn hadn't yet decided what it wanted to be. "Good evening," he said. "Good evening," I answered. "Did you bring an umbrella, miss?" "No." "Wise." He closed the door with a precise click. "Whoever brings one loses it." Dante was already in the back seat. I saw the corner of his mouth lift in an almost imperceptible movement, the kind he didn't bother to hide when he thought no one was watching. I also saw the way he looked me over from head to toe in a single motion, unhurried, registering the dark dress and the pinned-up hair, like someone filing away a piece of information to consult later. I sat beside him. The car slid through the narrow streets of the North End as if it knew every cobblestone by name, the orange reflections of the street lamps sliding across the glass. The Italian restaurant was small, with tables in a row against the wall, low yellow light, and an owner who kissed Dante on both cheeks and called me Signora without asking anything. We sat in a corner where the wall was at our backs, and the whole room was in front of us. Tom stayed at the bar, his back to us, eating a plate of octopus as if octopus were the greatest joy of the week. "Does he always dine at the same table as you?" "He doesn't dine," Dante answered. "He chews. It's different." Tom turned his head a little over his shoulder. "I'm listening, boss." "That was the intention." I laughed. "For real. That loose laugh you don't have time to plan. That comes before any internal protocol can stop it." Dante watched me laugh the way you watch a rare thing, and don't quite know what to do with it beyond not looking away. Tom, without turning all the way, let out a dry line. "Within acceptable range, boss, for now." The owner brought wine. They didn't order it. It came on its own, as if the bottle knew the way. I'd already understood, from inside the reports, that this was one of 3 houses where Dante ate without having to ask for anything. I faked surprise out of politeness, and lifted the glass to my mouth calmly. We talked about small things at first. The neighborhood, the early cold, the buildings changing downtown. He asked me about my childhood. I lied little, this time. I said my mother had died young, that my father had disappeared soon after, that I'd learned to pick locks before I learned to go unnoticed, and that both things had become a profession without my asking for it much. He listened to all of it, without interrupting, without offering the cheap benevolence of someone already forming an answer, while the other person is still talking. When the silence came, he turned the glass by the stem, slowly, his eyes on the white linen cloth. "My brother died 5 years ago." The sentence landed on the table like a stone he'd carried in his pocket all night, and finally decided to set down. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It was just a fact that weighed more than the others, and that he handed over without wrapping. I didn't ask how. I didn't ask his name. I knew the name. I knew the date. I knew the restaurant. The rest, what had been shelved for lack of evidence, I knew too, and that was why it was worse to stay silent. I just reached my hand across the table and held his for 2 or 3 seconds. He looked at our hands together, 2 of my fingers over his, the yellow light of the restaurant making everything warmer than it really was. He didn't pull his away. He didn't squeeze mine. He just stayed there, as if he needed an anchor, and didn't want to admit it out loud. It was the most intimate thing that happened that night, and neither of us said a word about it. Saturday morning, he picked me up and took me to a gallery on Newbury Street. We walked among paintings I pretended to understand, moving from frame to frame with the posture of someone who appreciates, chin slightly raised, in front of a huge canvas, all black with a single white horizontal line dividing it in 2. He tilted his head to the right like a dog listening to a distant sound. "Do you like it?" "No, me neither. But the gallerist owes me a favor." We left laughing onto the sidewalk, where the air smelled of coffee and damp leaves. I laughed so much the corner of my mouth ached. We walked the block side by side, without touching, our shoulders a reasonable distance apart. And even so, every step carried the accumulated weight of a touch that wasn't happening. It was like that with him. Everything took its time. Everything grew in that taking of time, in a way I couldn't name without my stomach tightening. In the afternoon, he dropped me at the door of my building and asked if he could come up. I said yes before my head had an opinion, and that in itself was already a piece of information I should have processed more carefully. My apartment got small with him inside. Dante walked through the living room slowly, like someone measuring the space to commit it to memory, hands behind his back, his feet heavy on the pale wood floor. He looked at the books on the shelf without taking any out. He looked at the records stacked near the player. He stopped in front of the gray cabinet in the corner by the window, the cabinet I kept locked with a small key I carried inside my wallet, and that I hid under a dark gray wool throw I'd toss over it as if it were decoration. His eyes lingered there a second longer than they should have, a second I felt entirely, at the back of my neck, like a current of cold air coming in through a gap. I held my breath. He turned. He smiled faintly. The cabinet was left behind. "You got any Chet Baker?" "I do." "Why?" "Put it on." I put it on. The sound of the trumpet filled the apartment with that soft, precise melancholy that only Chet Baker could produce, as if the music knew exactly how much space there was between 2 people and decided to fill it slowly. Dante came closer during the second song, unhurried, announcing nothing. He stopped a hand's breadth from me, his eyes on my face, without touching. We stood there, breathing together for about 30 seconds, and it was the most intimate thing that had happened between us since the restaurant, because neither of us gave in first. When he pulled away, it was also without hurry. He took his coat from the arm of the sofa and folded it over his shoulder like someone who hadn't yet decided to leave. I almost told him everything in that instant. The words started to form at the back of my throat. Listen, and I swallowed it before it could come out, sending it back to where it had come from. He noticed something had passed across my face. He didn't ask. He just slid his thumb along the line of my jaw for one whole second, his eyes holding mine, and then pulled away with the calm of a man who'd learned early that forcing things breaks what doesn't yet have a name. "There's an auction in Beacon Hill tonight," he said, his voice low and a little rough. "Charity, will you come with me?" "I will." It was stupid for 1,000 different reasons, and I knew every one of them. I accepted anyway. The auction hall had high ceilings and old chandeliers spilling a golden, faintly solemn light over people whose surnames I'd typed into reports. I recognized 3 faces before we were introduced to any of them. Men I'd seen in magazine photos, in society columns, in some newspaper piece I'd already read on some sleepless night. Dante guided me by the elbow with the discreet possession of someone who doesn't need to announce anything on entering a room. The space simply reorganized itself around him, like water yielding passage. We took glasses of champagne. We walked slowly among groups in conversation and pieces displayed on pedestals. That was when I saw him, a man across the hall, standing near a white marble column, with a slightly wrong posture. He wasn't looking at anything specific. He wasn't talking to anyone. His hands were empty at his sides, slightly away from his torso. At an auction, empty hands are suspicious. People hold a catalog, a glass, a bidding number, the bag on their shoulder. That man held only the air, and that tiny detail lit something very old and very trained inside me. My body understood before my head. I pulled Dante's elbow back, hard. In the exact instant, a bottle of wine crashed to the floor 2 tables to our right. The sharp sound of shattering glass cut the conversations for half a second. I saw, out of the corner of my eye, 2 men move at the same time, from opposite points of the hall, toward the place where the 2 of us had been standing half a second before. Tom appeared out of nowhere. Tom was in every place that mattered. 2 tuxedoed staff members I'd have sworn were waiters grabbed one of the men by the arm, without any visible commotion. A quick gesture, almost gentle from a distance, and the second one gave up at once, backed up 2 steps, and vanished through a side door like smoke. The whole thing lasted less than 12 seconds. Not one guest took their eyes off the auctioneer on the stage. Dante pushed me behind the column. His hands were on my shoulders, firm, assessing. His breathing was controlled with a precision you only learn after a lot of danger. Mine wasn't. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm okay. Look at me." I looked. "You reacted too fast," he said, without blinking, his eyes dark and completely fixed on mine. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, which was harder to argue with. I've worked with dangerous people for too long. My voice came out firm. On the outside, you learn to read a room. He didn't answer. He just watched me with a new calm, the kind that doesn't press but doesn't yield. And I saw in that calm the precise instant he filed the sentence away in an inner drawer, beside the drawer where he'd already filed the gray cabinet covered by the wool throw. He didn't say anything more. He took my hand. He took me to the car. In the back seat, the silence was thick as wet cloth. Tom drove with his usual calm, hands relaxed on the wheel, even pace. But I saw his eyes find me in the rear view a single time, just one, without smiling, without making a joke. He just looked at me, the kind of look that would open a file on me if it didn't already have one. I looked out the window. Boston passed in orange street lamp blurs, the wet sidewalks reflecting the light from below. I rested my temple against the cold glass and realized, with a clarity that turned my stomach, that I was tired of lying. Not of the lie itself. I'd lived with professional lies for almost a decade, and they'd never weighed like this. It was this specific lying, to this specific man, with his hand over mine on the dark leather seat, that had begun to cost me more than I'd budgeted when I took Pierce's contract. Tired of calculating every word before breathing, of pretending I didn't know the name of the owner of the Italian restaurant, of pretending I didn't know the script of his Saturdays, nor the name carved on the headstone she had located in a February report. Tired of calling discovery what was, in truth, memory. I felt his hand rest on mine on the seat between us. It wasn't a squeeze. It was a landing. the hand of someone who'd decided to stay without making a fuss about it. "Marceline?" "Yes." "You're shaking." "It's the cold," I lied, once more. The 1000th of that night, maybe the 1000th of the whole week. He didn't answer. He just left his hand there, over mine, and looked ahead, at Tom's back, and at the streets Boston kept opening before the car, and I realized that between the two of us, there now existed a third living thing, the lie, and that it breathed with a taste growing less and less bearable, there inside my chest, waiting for the day I could no longer hold it by the leash. The car turned onto my street. Tom stopped at the corner with the engine still running. Dante lifted my hand to his mouth and kissed my knuckles a single time, without theatrics, without making a ceremony of the gesture. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow." I went up. I closed the door. I didn't turn on the light. I leaned my forehead against the wooden frame and stayed there, in complete darkness, listening to the car's engine pull away down the street until the silence swallowed the sound entirely. And for the first time since I'd taken Pierce's contract, I thought it in plain words, without swerving, without softening it. I'm not going to be able to take this all the way through without telling him. The question that remained, suspended in the dark of the hallway, was more frightening than the man leaning against the column in the hall. When... Chapter 5, The Choice to Stay. I woke up before him. The sheet on my side of the bed was twisted, as if I'd tossed and turned all night trying to sleep right. I looked at that crease for a length of time I couldn't measure. The gray Sunday light came in through the bedroom window with that specific quality of October mornings in Boston. A cold, shadowless brightness that made everything seem quieter than it was. The city made the low sound of a day in no hurry to begin. I was in a hurry, and the hurry came with no destination. I sat on the edge of the bed for a whole minute, trying to remember the last time I'd woken with a physical urge to cry and couldn't. It wasn't crying. It was the opposite of that. It was a dry tightness, without tears, that wanted a human voice nearby. And only one person in the world knew how to take in Marceline Crowe at 8 on a Sunday morning without asking a question. I got up before thinking. I washed my face, tied my hair into a crooked bun, put on the first gray sweater I found in the closet, and laced up the old boot that had been with me on every case. When I left the building, the October wind came up the street with that thin bite Boston knows how to give before winter really arrives. The pavement was damp from a drizzle that had stopped too early, and the streetlights hadn't gone out yet. I walked 3 blocks with no fixed direction, until I realized my feet were already deciding for me. I was going to Joss's place. Joss lived in a cramped triplex in the South End that she shared with 2 dead plants, and a cat she swore belonged to the neighbor. When she opened the door, still in flannel pajamas and with the face of someone who'd slept 3 hours, she looked at me, looked at her own wristwatch, and looked back at me. "Marceline." Her voice was hoarse with sleep. "It's 8:40 on a Sunday morning." "I know. The last time you showed up here before 11 was because you'd lost the office key." "I know." She looked at me for another second. Then she opened the door wider and stepped aside without saying another word. I went in. The house smelled of coffee that had been made a few minutes earlier, and of grapefruit peeled in the sink. Joss closed the door with her foot, went to the kitchen, and came back with 2 mugs. She handed me one without asking. She sat on the sofa with her legs folded under her body and waited. I couldn't sit. I walked to the window. I walked to the bookcase, where she accumulated books in stacks that defied gravity. I came back to the center of the room. The mug burned the palm of my hand, and I didn't care. "Joss, I'm here. I think I'm in love." She took a long sip of coffee. She didn't seem surprised. She didn't seem anything, actually. And that was exactly what I needed from her in that moment. The only friend in the world capable of taking in a sentence like that without making a scene. With him. The man you spent months investigating. With him. The man you spent months investigating and who still doesn't know it. I sat. I couldn't stay standing any longer. I leaned my head against the back of the sofa and looked up at the dirty white painted ceiling, with a damp stain in the corner that Joss ignored with the same discipline with which she ignored the dead plants. She waited with the patience she only had for me. "There was an auction last night," I began, "and someone tried again." Her mug stopped halfway up. Again. I saw it before it happened. Wrong posture, wrong distance, wrong hand on the wrong side of the body. I pulled him back. It was too fast. He noticed it was too fast. And did he say anything? He said I reacted too fast. I said it was a journalist's professional reflex. Joss set the mug on the coffee table, slowly, with the care of someone choosing her next words instead of choosing where to set the mug. She rested her forehead on her fingertips. I knew that gesture. It was the gesture she made when she was choosing among 5 sentences in her head to see which would be useful. You know he didn't buy it. I know. You know he filed it away. I know. And you know what's going to happen when he notices there's more that doesn't add up. I know, Joss. I know. I know. I know. I said the last word louder than I meant to. A hard silence settled between us, and Joss didn't fill it. She'd learned, over the years, that with me, silence is more useful than advice. I rested the mug on my knee. I never wanted this, I said quietly. I never asked to want this. I did the job. I wrote the reports. It was supposed to be just like every other case. It was supposed to be a dangerous man, a fat payment, a closed file, and life going on. And then I found out about the girl. And then I went to the restaurant. And then he kissed me back as if he already knew me. And then I couldn't get out of this anymore. Joss listened. When she looked up, she had that joke-free expression she almost never used, the one left on her face after all the jokes had already passed. Marceline, she said my whole name, uncut. You never let yourself want anyone. I felt something tighten behind my eyes, and this time I couldn't push it back. A tear fell without permission. I wiped it with the back of my hand like someone erasing evidence. That's why it hurts now, because it's real. You know the difference. You always knew the difference. You just never had to deal with the real side. And what do? She took a deep breath, like someone about to dive. You tell him. I can't tell him. You can't not tell him. Joss. Marceline. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. If he finds out first, it'll be worse. If he finds out later, it'll be worse. There's a short window in between where you can say it in your own words, and it's closing while we sit here. I looked at her. I looked at the mug. I looked at the floor, where Joss's worn rug held the history of a decade of rent. I'm going to, I said. Today. Joss nodded once. She didn't say, good luck. She didn't say, it'll be fine. She just reached her hand over the arm of the sofa and held my fingers for a second longer than she needed to. I left the triplex around noon. The wind had eased a little, and the sun was trying to break through the low clouds without really managing it. I walked to the tea and went home without hearing anything, without thinking of a single sentence. My mind empty in the way that only goes empty, when the whole body has already decided what it's going to do, and the head hasn't caught up yet. I spent the rest of the day at home, looking at the gray cabinet covered by the throw. I showered as evening fell, the water hot to the limit of bearable, as if I could rinse off what was dammed up. I put on a simple black dress, no neckline, nothing. I put on flat shoes. I grabbed the apartment key, grabbed the phone, grabbed the courage, and when night came, I went to his penthouse without warning. The doorman recognized me. He didn't ask questions. He pressed the button for the internal elevator that went straight up to his floor, and the ride was as long as it was short, and I couldn't explain how a thing can be both at once. But in that elevator it was. The walls were mirrored. I didn't look at myself once. The door opened directly into the living room. Dante was standing, near the tall window that showed the whole city below. White shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a glass of whiskey in his right hand. He turned the moment the elevator opened. He saw me. He made no expression at all. He set the glass on the marble console and stepped out of the way. He didn't ask what I was doing there. He didn't say good evening. He just took 3 steps to the side, leaving the path from the entrance clear, like someone who already knew I'd come even without being warned. I went in. His living room smelled of a dark perfume with no name, and of firewood that must have burned a few hours earlier in the hearth built into the corner. The embers still existed, a low orange glow pulsing in the silence. He watched me walk to the middle of the rug. He waited. He didn't close the distance. Dante, I'm here. There are things. I swallowed hard. There are things about me you don't know. He moved then, just 2 steps. He stopped in front of me, too close and too far at the same time. In that specific way, only he could manage. He looked at me in a way that seemed to last the whole night. You came here tonight like someone who's already decided something difficult. I choked on my own breath. Then what? I can see it. His voice was low, without sweetness. You walked in here carrying something. It's been written on you since the elevator. Dante, whatever it is, it'll come out of your mouth. When you decide. Not before, not after. I stayed quiet. He continued. I could have stopped that first night. He spoke slowly, and each word seemed chosen 3 times. And I could have thanked you. looked you up once to say what needed to be said, and gone back to my life. That's what I should have done. And why didn't you? Because I chose. He said it that way. No flourish, no performance. I chose. A two-syllable word that asked for no answer. I felt my legs weaken for a second. I rested my fingertips on the back of the sofa to cover it. You fell first, I whispered. I fell first. He didn't seem ashamed to admit it. And I'm going to keep falling. Regardless of what you've come to tell me tonight, I want you to know that first, so the rest doesn't come out of your mouth as a plea for forgiveness. There's nothing to be forgiven. There's something to be heard. I looked at him. I looked deep into him. The way you look at someone when you understand you're looking at another real person in the world, not at some shadow. And the exact moment I opened my mouth to begin telling him, he spoke again. Not today. What? Not today. He touched his finger, just the tip, to my jaw. Today I want to tell you something first. I've never told anyone. I swallowed hard. Okay. He moved 3 steps away, but he didn't go far. He stopped in the middle of the rug, sideways to me, and looked at the black night reflected in the window pane, and I saw his face doubled in that reflection, as if it were the face of 2 different men. My brother died 5 years ago. I know. You told me. I told you he died. I didn't tell you how. I waited. It was an ambush. His voice stayed low, but there was something inside it that seemed torn. At a restaurant. Not much different from the one in Beacon Hill. I should have seen it coming. There were signs. I saw the signs and ignored them, because I figured he was being paranoid again. It was the kind of thing he and I argued about every week. I told him to relax. I told him to have a quiet dinner. I told him no one was going to touch him that night. His breathing faltered at one point. It came back. And he left the house without security that night because I said he didn't need it. My chest locked. Dante, I've carried this for 5 years like a branding iron. He turned to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, his face held no control, only weight. And I never told anyone because no one ever appeared whom I wanted to tell. We took a step toward each other at the same time, without arranging it. There's something, he said, even lower, and that I've never shown anyone. I want to show you tomorrow. Okay. Early. Okay. He rested his forehead against mine. That small, domestic, simple gesture, and that between the 2 of us weighed what a whole city weighs. His hand rose to the back of my neck, his fingers opening slowly against my hair. The other settled on my hip, still, without pressing, just there. And then he kissed me. It wasn't like the kiss at the restaurant. That one had been performance, urgency, survival. It wasn't like the brief kiss in my apartment the night before. That one had been a spark. This was something else. This was slow and deep, and lasted so long I lost track of where the room ended. It was a kiss chosen by both of us at the same time, without question and without answer. When he pulled away, he kept his forehead pressed against mine. Tomorrow, early, I nodded against his skin. The night gave me back to the city after a length of time I couldn't count. The elevator went down with me, and the Boston of the streets came into existence again as a backdrop, with the muffled noise of the late traffic and the reflection of the street lamps on the wet sidewalk. I got home with the taste of him still in my mouth and the truth still in my throat, without having told him, and this time, it wasn't cowardice. It was a pact. He'd asked for tomorrow. I'd accepted tomorrow. I locked the door from the inside. I leaned my head against the cold wood. I won't tell him today, I thought. I'll tell him tomorrow. At some point in that place he hasn't even shown me yet, in the light that's still going to exist, with the courage I'm still going to find. I'll tell him. It was the first promise I'd made to myself in years, and it was the only one that mattered, and I had no idea what he was about to show me. Chapter 6. The House He Hides from the World. The phone rang at 6:40 in the morning. I'm downstairs. I went down with a small bag, coat zipped up to my neck, and my stomach tight in a way I couldn't name. Tom Mercer was in the driver's seat of a black SUV, pulled up against the curb on my street. He looked at me in the rear view, while I closed the back door and adjusted the seatbelt. His head nodded half a centimeter. Miss Crow. Tom. Coffee's in the cup holder. Midnight black, because at this hour anything lighter is a personal insult. I laughed without meaning to. He didn't take his eyes off the road, but I could tell the corner of his mouth lifted a millimeter. Dante was in the passenger seat, dark suit, no tie, holding a disposable cup identical to mine. He turned his head, looked at me, and the thing I saw inside his eyes that morning was different from anything I'd seen before. It was calm. It was choice. It was tomorrow. Early turning into now. Good morning. Good morning. We left Boston taking the interstate north, toward the Massachusetts coast, and the city fell away behind us at a breathing pace, in no hurry at all. The sun rose behind a layer of gray clouds. The orange leaves piled up on the shoulders. Tom drove in that specific way of someone who's driven all his life for someone else. Attentive, without seeming attentive. Choosing the lane before the person beside him realized they'd need to choose. We stopped at a highway gas station somewhere I couldn't name on the mental map I had. Tom got out to fuel up and came back with 3 more coffees. Will the lady accept a terrible gas station donut? I will. Excellent. I wouldn't recommend it either, but life is made of small, bad decisions. Dante laughed quietly against the rim of his cup. I looked at him. He looked at me. It was a short second. It was a second of rest I didn't know I needed. The drive lasted 90 minutes. When Tom turned onto a dirt road that descended between tall pines and the smell of the sea began to come in through the gap in the window, I understood I'd left Boston for real for the first time in months. I felt something tighten in my chest that still didn't have a name. I decided not to name it yet. The house appeared at the end of the curve, white. Wood painted a white worn down by salt, surrounded by pines, set against a low cliff, with a view of the open Atlantic as far as the horizon could hold. No sign, no big gate, nothing to tell the world that house existed. We're here, Dante said. Just that. Tom stopped the car near the side entrance and got out first. He opened my door, with that silent professionalism he had. I got out. Dante came around the other side, rounded the car, and stopped beside me for a second before we climbed the 3 steps of the porch. The door opened before he touched it. Uncle Dante! A 7-year-old girl appeared barefoot in the doorway, brown hair tied into 2 crooked braids, blue cotton dress, a thick book under her left arm. She looked at him, looked at me, gripped the book tighter, and stared at me in that serious way children have when they're deciding whether or not to accept you. Are you Uncle Dante's lady? Dante choked on the air. I laughed without being able to hold it in. It was impossible. The girl had a grandparent's nerve. Her eyes had a brown similar to his, and her posture too, and the way she tilted her head too. I am, I said, lowering myself to her height. I am. She held out a small hand. Do you want to see my room? I do. She turned and ran inside without checking whether I was following. I looked at Dante. He had the coffee cup frozen in the air, halfway to his mouth. The most feared man in Boston, standing in that doorway, not knowing what to do with his girl and the woman he'd brought there for the first time in his life. Go, he said. His voice was hoarse. I'll be right in. I followed Elodie. Her room had a white-painted iron bed with a daisy comforter, a bookshelf from floor to ceiling, and a tall window from which you could see the sea. She showed me each of the 8 stuffed animals by name. She showed me a notebook where she drew the waves every day, and each wave had a number because she was trying to figure out whether they were always the same or always different. She showed me the thick book she carried, a collection of old fairy tales, brown-covered. She showed me a card game she'd invented herself, and whose rules only she understood. Can you do a 3-strand braid? She asked suddenly, holding one of her own crooked braids. The lady who takes care of me only knows 2. I can. Will you? I sat on her bed. She sat with her back to me on the floor, between my knees, and undid the 2 braids. I braided slowly, dividing the hair into 3, and her hair had the smell of plain soap that was the quietest thing in the world. She stayed still, and she told me, in a low voice, that she'd started reading about whales because the book had a lot of pictures, and because her teacher had said whales sing. She wanted to know why. I couldn't speak for a moment. I kept braiding. Dante appeared in the doorway at some point. He didn't come in. He stood there, shoulder leaning against the frame, and watched us from across the room like someone who'd never seen a scene like it in his whole life. At some point he crossed his arms. At some point he uncrossed them. At some point he just stood there looking. The whole afternoon passed like that. She taught me her card game, and I lost all 3 rounds because the rules changed when it suited her. The 3 of us had lunch at a round table in the kitchen, a tomato soup the house's caretaker had left ready. Elodie sat between me and him. She told me, with all the seriousness in the world, that the humpback whale sings, that no one has yet figured out why it sings, that some people think it's for other whales, that other people think it's just for singing. Dante listened. He ate slowly. He looked at me over the top of her head, with an expression I'd never seen on that face. When the sun began to set, Elodie dozed off on the living room sofa, with the book open on her chest. Dante pulled a plaid blanket from the back of the couch and covered the girl without making a sound. He touched his hand to her forehead for an instant. He left the room like someone leaving a church. The back porch looked straight out at the sea. The sky was already purple at the horizon line. He handed me a glass with some wine in it, and we stood, side by side, leaning against the white wooden railing. "I've never shown this house to anyone," he said. "I know. How do you know? It was the most dangerous pause of my life, because you wouldn't trust like this twice." He nodded slowly. He didn't answer. The sentence hung in the air between the two of us. It wasn't a confession. Not yet. But it was the edge. It was the edge of the cliff where the previous day's tomorrow had become today. Without my noticing the exact moment of the turn, he held my hand. He lifted my knuckles to his mouth, without kissing, just touching, like someone weighing a decision. "You'd be happy here," he said, low, "if you wanted." I looked at him. I looked at the sea. I looked at the half-open door from which you could see the plaid blanket rising and falling with the girl's breathing. "I want," I said. He led me inside by the hand. The bedroom door closed behind the two of us. The next morning's light came in through the window. The cold way sea light comes in, without color, just brightness. I woke first. His hand was open on the sheet between the two of us, fingers relaxed, the quiet weight of his arm resting near my shoulder. His breathing was slow. I stayed still for a while just to listen. I got out of bed carefully. I put on the gray sweater I'd tossed on the chair the night before. I walked barefoot to the kitchen. I turned on the low light over the counter. I made coffee in a metal pot that looked older than the house. Elodie appeared in the doorway in blue pajamas, with the whale book under her arm. "Good morning. Good morning, sweetheart." She climbed onto the high stool without asking for help, sat with her legs folded, and opened the book to the page marked with a dog ear. Dante appeared a few minutes later. Pajama pants, white t-shirt, hair a mess. He saw me in the kitchen first. He stopped in the doorway for a second just to look. Then he walked over to Elodie, kissed the top of her head, and came to the counter to take the mug I was already pouring. The three of us at the counter. He poured more coffee for me. He filled a glass of milk for Elodie. She kept reading quietly about humpback whales as if we'd never done anything in that kitchen but this. I looked at him pouring. I looked at her reading. I thought, for just a second, before sweeping the thought far away, and what if he finds out before I have the courage to tell him? I swept it away. I smiled. He smiled back over the mug. I pressed my palm to the warm cup. The sun rose over the sea, and we stayed silent for a length of time that needed no words. Lena here, that wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee.
I loved her, trusted her like I'd never trusted anyone. I let her near the one thing I protected from the entire world. Then I found out that the woman who saved my life had been lying since the very first kiss. Marceline wasn't a journalist. She was something much worse. Tom walked into my office without knocking, and he never comes in without knocking. He dropped a gray file on my desk, and in it were 12 months of my movements. And there was her name, Marceline Crowe. She was a private investigator. She knew who I was, she knew my secrets, and she'd already investigated even the one little girl I hid from the world. I should have hated her. I should have thrown her out of my life. But then Elodie disappeared, and Marceline vanished with her. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same truth. Marceline had taken my niece. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know what terrified me more, finding out that she'd betrayed me, or finding out the reason that made her run off with my girl.
Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to receive the next ones, search for My Stories by Lena on YouTube to get the best dark romance content. Remember, the official channel is My Stories by Lena on YouTube. I'll be waiting for you there. Congratulations! Your purchase has been confirmed, and you now have full access to books 1 and 2 of all our stories, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Everything is available on the My Stories platform, from Mafia romance and billionaire romance to our spicier tales. This content is ready for you now, with new episodes added daily. Access is simple. Just log in using the same email address you used for your purchase. A confirmation has also been sent to that same email. The My Stories platform is very simple and intuitive. Each image represents a story. If it has a book too, just click and press play. Everything is already unlocked for you. You can also rate each story, leave a like, and write a comment. Your feedback will be visible to all our other subscribers. This is our romance universe, so please feel free to interact. From this moment on, this is officially your home for romance stories. Just head over to mystoriesromance.com and press play. Welcome to the family.